Hello, welcome to the Sophos MDR ThreatCast June 2025 edition. As always, we're going to take a little beat, let people get joined, and then we'll get things started. So hold on tight, wait for people to join, and then we'll get started. Hey there, thanks for joining the Sophos MDR ThreatCast June 2025 edition. As always, we wait maybe 20 seconds or so, let people get joined. I'm still seeing those numbers going up. Once they start to stabilize, then we'll get things started. So hold on tight, we'll get started really soon. Hey there, if you just joined. We're just waiting for people to get connected, get settled, and then we'll get started. Give us another 10 seconds or so. Okay, starting to stabilize. Alrighty. Hello, welcome to the Sophos MDR ThreatCast 2025 edition. My name is Greg Idden, the security architect for Sophos Security Services. Joining me is a number of wonderful people. We've got Mark Parsons from Threat Intelligence, also Jordan Olness from Threat Intelligence, and we've got Pavla Kulum from Threat Hunting. We're going to go through a number of different topics. As always, the staples, we're going to go through the threat landscape, what's been going on in the wider world, what kind of things have been happening in sort of notable news and various attacks and vulnerabilities. Jordan's then going to take us through the observed threat activity, what we've seen in Sophos MDR. Then Pavla's going to take us through a few notable hunts that the threat hunting team have been operating over. And then I'll take us through the XOps section. XOps are taking a little breather as they work on some projects. So I think I'm going to be handling that section for the next couple of months. We do actually also have a most unwanted section. So that's going to be sneaking back this month. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. But as always, if you have any questions, don't wait until the end to start asking them. You can see over in the right-hand side of your screen, I believe it should be the right, there is a chat and a QA box. Just click QA. You can put in your question. What I'll do is I'll either answer it live, or one of my colleagues will answer it live behind the scenes. Live in the sense that we'll do it actually via text. I may interject with the speaker and let them know that there's a good question they should tackle, or we'll hold on to your question and tackle it at the end. We always get this question. I'm sure we'll get asked it again. Video recordings and the references for any of the material that we're covering today will be made available on the Sophos MDR community channel within the next 24 hours or so, give or take, depending on when video gets processed and uploaded. But yeah, you'll find all the reference notes there, hopefully sometime around this time tomorrow. All right, that's enough of my voice. Let's bring Mark Parsons on stage, and Mark's going to take us through the threat landscape. So Mark, welcome. Let's get started.
Very much, Greg. Excited to be here. So folks, to start things off, we're going to start with the vulnerabilities to watch. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is the Roundcube webmail vulnerability. Now, this specific vulnerability is a CSS score of 9.9 out of 10, which means that and it allows for remote code execution from authenticated users. Now, the reason why we're including this specific vulnerability is because it is incredibly widespread. It is currently part of many virtual private servers web consoles. So if you sign up, spend $4 and go ahead and get any kind of web hosting, you'll often get a web panel with that. They'll just include Roundcube webmail right with it as part of the package of signing up. This makes the install base for this something with somewhere in the region of 2.4 million installations that was identified by Census on June 10th. Thankfully, that number has dropped by about 33% to just 1.67 million. So that's still quite the number. Yes, there is the need for remote code for authentication, but that being said, there's some lack of sanitization in the get from parameter, which allows for PHP object deserialization. And so what I think is most intriguing about this is that those accessing those credentials can be easily purchased online. It was also added to the CISA Kev on the 9th of June. What makes this more and more intriguing as well is that there was actually a 3-day delta between the patch being released by Roundcube and then threat actors reverse engineering that patch and generating a new exploit. And so the researchers that had responsibly reported this to Roundcube went ahead and actually published the proof of concept code in hopes that others would be able to better defend themselves. So again, we really urge you to go ahead and patch as quickly as you possibly can. Now, the final item of note regarding this Roundcube webmail service is that while there has not been publication of exploitation, it is worth noting that the Polish CERT or CERT Polska has identified and reported on Roundcube CVEs being leveraged for phishing campaigns. We made sure to include that in the show notes. After that, we have a Chrome browser CVE, CVE 2025-5419. Now, this one is the third 0 day to hit Chrome since 2025. It is incredibly impactful in the sense that every Chromium and Chromium-based browser, so you have Microsoft Edge, you have Brave, there's a whole litany of other browsers that leverage Chromium as the behind-the-scenes machine that actually create this entire browser and allow it to function. On top of that, there are Electron apps, which actually are just disguised browsers, essentially, that are also vulnerable to this. And the challenge that occurs with that is that essentially these vulnerabilities will sit under the hood for this application, and then they can be exploited as well as the browser. So again, the reason why this is important and why these are being targeted by threat actors is this is almost the one of the most exposed aspects of the perimeter of an environment, as every single employee is likely leveraging a browser in their daily use. And on top of that, they're using that browser to go to many different locations. This specific vulnerability allows for watering hole type of attacks where they can use a specially crafted HTML page to cause a heap overflow and then exploit the vulnerability. Now, this was seen in the wild. Unfortunately, there's been no further publication from Google about what exactly was done with it. So please, we implore you, make sure you're patched as quickly as you can, both your browsers and your Electron apps. Finally, the third vulnerability to watch, the Microsoft Web Dabs, CVE 2025-33053. Now, while this only has a CVSS score of 8.8, it is, as my colleague put it, in place and impacting almost every single version of Windows that is being patched currently to date. So Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022, 2025, Windows 10, Windows 10, Windows 11. Every single version of Windows has this WebDAV component packaged in with it. It essentially functions as a way to work as a net share over the open internet. And in addition to that, it was actually leveraged by a threat actor, an APT called Stealth Falcon, that's Checkpoint researched on, and they were leveraging it in phishing campaigns. The way it functions is by using a specific executable, and this executable, which is a part of the Internet Explorer utility that allows for identification of problems with the service. They changed the working directory to their server. It's the IEDIAG command executable. Now, once the working directory has been changed via this WebDAV exploit, this IEDIAG command was then leveraged to launch route.exe, but because the working directory was changed to a threat actor server, route.exe was actually the Horus loader, which is actually a custom Mythic C2 modification to the Mythic C2 framework. And that went on to complete shellcode injection. So again, we really urge you to patch immediately. It is all over the place. This vulnerability, while it was only identified in a small subset of attacks, threat actors will absolutely leverage it going forward from here. In terms of how to manage this, we would implore you to, again, make sure you follow manufacturer's guidance and regularly apply all product updates. Now, moving on to notable breaches. And this specific breach is pretty complex. I really have to say, if you really want to break out the whiteboard, honestly, and go dig into this one, we made sure to include it in the show notes because it is a massive set of intrusions that was published by SentinelOne. This particular publication covers 6 different activity sets across 2 different threat clusters, impacting over 70 organizations across a range of industry verticals. Now, what is more intriguing about this is that in addition to these different clients of SentinelOne, SentinelOne itself was targeted by both of these threat clusters, along with a South Asian government entity, a European media organization, and a wide range of IT service providers. So these 2 threat clusters are broken up into the Purple Haze threat cluster and the ShadowPad cluster. They loosely associate some Purple Haze intrusions with actors that overlap with the suspected Chinese cyber espionage groups, publicly reported as APT-15, also named as Qichang or Nylon Typhoon, known for its global targeting of critical sectors, including telecommunications, IT technology, and government organizations, as well as UNC 5174, which is assessed to be a contractor for China's Ministry of State Security, primarily focusing on initial exploitation and specializing in exploiting vulnerabilities in targeted systems, functioning as like a Chinese APT initial access broker of sorts. It is this group, Purple Haze, that is associated with the reconnaissance against Sentinel-1. And again, Sentinel-1 itself was not breached. Do not hear that, please, I beg of you. But they are doing the right thing by sharing a critical piece of information, which is that security vendors like Sophos represent an important target for threat actors because of our ability to interrupt their operations, as well as our deep visibility into customer networks. Thank you very much for making sure to present this and share this information. We're all under this type of attack routinely. Another intriguing aspect of this Purple Haze cluster specifically, that makes them particularly challenging to identify and track, is that they are leveraging orb networks. An orb network is an operational relay box network. And the way that you can think of this as a basically private Tor network that China has created on its own. And they do this by actually taking virtual private servers and purchasing them, as well as infecting Soho routers, right? So there's the meme on the side. My home router is actually China's home router. That's because what they're doing is mass exploiting all of these Soho routers and then creating them as nodes inside of their private Tor network. They then will sell access off to other Chinese actors. They then will essentially function this as their own private VPN or Tor network, where they will bounce their communications around inside these intermediary nodes and then egress their traffic into the target environment's country, attacking from, for instance, what might look like your grandmother's home router. And so this makes it particularly challenging to, one, defend against if you're the enterprise, but then two, incredibly challenging for defenders to monitor and track what is essentially a constantly influx layer of communication and capability, allowing for a threat actor to pop up theoretically, or metaphorically rather, from anywhere within the digital landscape that is the open internet. So that's the first threat cluster. The second is the Shadowplat cluster, which is separate, and they actually went on to target IT subsidiaries that provided logistics and supplies to Sentinel-1 itself. And so again, we really want to give a tip of the hat, so to speak, to them for bringing forth and publishing on this because of that specific aspect. Shadowplat is a commodity piece of malware that is only accessible to, or a closed source piece of malware that is only accessible or has only been published on being used by Chinese Nexus actors. And what makes this specific grouping or cluster of activity unique is that it uses a unique obfuscation method called scatterbrain. And this has been used and associated with the Chinese APT umbrella actor APT-41. And then another location of where these two threat clusters overlap is not only Sentinel-1, but both threat clusters were observed more directly targeting that same South Asian government entity. So onto the tactics that were used, as I already discussed, that orb network, the Shadowpad, but then finally Nimbo C2. Nimbo C2 is a common off-the-shelf GitHub command and control framework. And this is another trend that Chinese Nexus threat actors are leveraging and have been for a few years now, where they will use this massive code base of red team tools to just pull it off the shelf and say, oh, well, my custom framework is being blocked right now. Can I just drop something else in? This makes it incredibly challenging, again, for defenders to prevent. But as we said, it's incredibly challenging. And honestly, this is why you need to employ an EDR vendor to make sure you're monitoring your networks consistently over time. The other aspect and key takeaway is that the targeting of these different clusters was eventually focused on the supply chain, essentially, of Sentinel-1. So not Sentinel-1 itself, but the vendors that provide services to that group and company. So we really need to implore you to make sure that you're minding how those different connections that you need to conduct your business are monitored and managed as you have different vendors within your network, right? You want to deploy a secondary domain controller, make it read-only, enclose it completely, separate the credential sets so that they're not the same components as your own environment. Another notable breach to watch, the Aflac Insurance Company was published a filing on June 12th indicating a breach of their network associated and caused by a sophisticated cybercrime group. They leveraged social engineering tactics to gain access to this network, and while they have engaged with incident response organizations, they have yet to fully disclose the depth of the attack. But that being said, they are now offering any free credit monitoring as well as identity protection to anyone that calls into their call center. So if you use Aflac, we implore you to keep your eyes on this as well as to call in to make sure that your credentials and your digital persona is managed and monitored online. Finally, speaking about our second to last slide, speaking about more notable news and more supply chain attacks, on June 6th, the NPM package, or the Node Package Manager, had a package infected with 1 million, had a package that is downloaded over 1 million times in a week with rat-like capabilities. Now, this rat or remote access Trojan would allow the threat actor to investigate the system that was installed on, as well as they used a path traversal exploit where they could deploy their own custom Python modules to allow for any type of technique or capability to be executed from that Python code. Now, what was intriguing as well as I dug into this story more and why I've actually not been able to take all of the stories that I have related to NPM package compromise is because that Akamai security that Keto security that identified this dug in further and identified not only these 7 different NPM packages, but 19 different GitHub repos since December of 2024 being targeted and attacked by threat actors. Now, the reason why this is so important is that as you as vendors and you as the enterprises go forth and create more robust defenses, threat actors are going to continue to evolve what they target and how they and their mechanisms to gain access to your environment, right? And so what we ask you to do to try and curtail this access, right, is that you, one, need to engage in proactive threat hunting, but more importantly, you need to set up policies that will expand across your environment and protect you from a variety of different attacks. You can set up your own registry to allow for imports and downloads of packages that are only vetted by your security team after they have gone through a code review, instead of just allowing any developer or any individual to download code and execute it from the open internet. Finally, we have the ransomware leak site analysis. We have a few different groups that are rising up. The Qilin or Agenda ransomware has been around the longest, relatively speaking, out of these top 3, having first been cited in July of 2022, with origins in Russian-speaking cybercriminal forums. Looking at their targeting in the past 30 days, this ransomware group is all over the map, extorting hospitality industry entities, logistics and supply chain organizations, all the way to satellite component manufacturers and insurance providers. Their locker focuses on a wide range of documents, databases, images, and other critical data. Their techniques after attempting to disable EDR systems will be to capture credentials before deploying their locker. After that, we have SafePay, who have been around and is the youngest group, been around since 2024. They leverage the double extortion model and typically target manufacturing as well as logistics and supply chain entities. This group is believed to partner with initial access brokers to gain access to target environments, so mitigations will be unfortunately rather spread out. As you'll need to make sure your MFA is deployed, you need to maintain strict privilege access management and locking down for as many applications as possible throughout your environment through tooling such as application control, because their access avenues are so wide-reaching. Finally, the other rise is Akira ransomware, who's been around since late February, early March of 2023. This ransomware group has got a thing for branding, as they leverage a retro aesthetic in their data leak site, as well as took the name of a popular anime. They're frequently seen here, which speaks to the level of capability. They also are known for demanding large sums of cryptocurrency and are often seen exploiting MFA and vulnerable edge devices. So if you want to stay off of this retro leak site, make sure that your MFA is in place and your edge devices are patched as quickly as possible after release. I'm now going to hand things off to Jordan for the next section.
Hello, thanks for joining everybody. Let's take a look at the observed threat activity for this month. Okay, starting off with trends. Let's take a look at the ransomware families we observed in the wild this month. Relatively less amount of ransomware than we've maybe seen in months in the past. The groups you see there, Akira, Qilin, PlayCrypt, or Play Ransomware, no surprises here. We know that these groups are very active right now, and to see them in the wild is not really a surprise for us. The big outlier here you see is Blackbyte ransomware. I actually could not remember the last time I had seen a Blackbyte ransomware case. I actually had to go look up a OSINT source to see that the last time they had a post on their data leak site was September 2024. So it's been a minute. That also being said, that leak site that they mentioned has gone down. I actually could not find a current data leak site for Blackbyte that is up right now. So not quite sure what's going on, but sure enough, yeah, this is a bona fide Blackbyte ransomware case that we observed in the wild. Something of note, I did want to take a look at that Blackbyte ransomware case, see what was up with it. There was a lot of visibility problems and a lot of logging problems, but one thing that really stuck out for me, our MDR analysts were able to find evidence that at least one person in the organization had been compromised with a click fix attack just 2 weeks before the ransomware showed up. If you're not familiar with click fix, this is the kind of attack where the attackers are trying to convince or coerce a victim into taking a command line command and entering it into the run dialog box in Windows. Quite often this involves some kind of fake CAPTCHA or fake Cloudflare turnstile or something. And we have seen an awful lot of these click fix attacks in the wild. If you are maybe not aware of click fix attacks or not familiar with them, maybe it's a good thing to go look them up and get some understanding. If you are a person that brings awareness on threats to your organization and you haven't covered click fix yet, I would definitely recommend it because yes, it is out there in the wild a lot. Okay, moving on to initial access vectors, we continue to see that VPN appliances are being targeted as the most common initial access vector in the wild. In the vast majority of cases, targeted accounts lack MFA and quite often have weak passwords. And we can see in the data that attackers are keen to capitalize on exactly this kind of thing. Moving right along, let's talk about Stack 1260. This is a new stack for us. This is one that we just created this past month. If you're not familiar, Stack is an acronym for Sophos Threat Activity Cluster, and this is how we track threat actors in our intelligence database. This is also a stack that we assess to be a nation-state actor, and we'll kind of take a look at that as we go. So let's talk about how the story of Stack 1260 begins. This starts with a multi-estate victim. This is an attack that started in one estate and then moved to another estate and then to another. In total, 3 sub-estates under the same organization were impacted. This is the kind of persistent attitude that we don't typically see in financially motivated threat actors. Usually, if it's financially motivated ransomware, they're just happy to get the first thing they get and get a payout. This kind of long, slow kind of approach kind of hints to us that maybe this threat actor has a different motivation than money. So the intrusion itself was quite comprehensive. There was a lot going on there. I'm just going to go over some of the things that were more notable about this intrusion. First off, initial access. The threat actor exploited a vulnerability in an external-facing Tomcat server. They deployed web shells. They moved laterally from there and dropped web shells as they went along. In addition to those web shells, the threat actor dropped some malware in an interesting way. They took a legitimate Sandboxy executable. If you're not familiar with Sandboxy, it's a lightweight virtualization tool. And they took that, they renamed it to imitate a Sophos product, and then executed that to trigger a DLL sideload attack, basically. So that was a little bit different than you typically see. One more thing that was notable, we took a look at the web shell command and control servers. And as we're investigating them, we start seeing names like Asus router and MikroTik router. These are names you typically see more associated with residential networking devices. This is, so what it seems to us is that this threat actor is routing their command and control traffic through residential networking devices, much as maybe Mark had described earlier. So we do assess that this command and control traffic is taking place over a residential proxy network that either the threat actor controls or is maybe just at least has access to. So yeah, we want to finish off by saying that we are just getting started with the stack. There is a lot of information to dig through, and you may hear us talk about Stack 1260 some point in the future. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about Transfer Loader. This is a new loader. This is the loader that is believed to have only come on the scene here in 2025, early 2025. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with loaders, the purpose of a loader is to evade antivirus and then deploy some other malware as a payload. So think of it as a malware for sneaking other malware past antivirus. And in this case, that's actually exactly what happened. And I want to highlight this case because it's a really good example of why defense in depth is important. So let's talk about how the actual attack played out. Victim received an email containing a link to an alleged resume. This was apparently part of their job. Resume was malware. This was a malware sample that was leveraging that transfer loader. Since it did not match any of our existing static or dynamic antivirus protections, no alert got triggered. It actually executed successfully with no impediment whatsoever. So from there, the threat actor exfiltrated a VPN client installer that was on the victim's machine. Doesn't seem like the most high value thing to be exfiltrating. Usually you'd think it's something that could hold for ransom or something of high value. No, it was an installer for the VPN client. And what we feel this was more oriented towards was that they were looking to establish ways of getting back into the victim environment over a legitimate channel like their own VPN. And actually, we do end up seeing this threat actor coming in over that VPN a little later. And for about a week, that's really all this threat actor kind of did. They just popped their head in a couple times, went looking for a few more VPN client installers, but they really didn't do anything terribly malicious. And we have assessed that this stage in the infection, this stage of the attack, was being performed by an initial access broker. This would be a person that really is only concerned about getting a foothold in the organization and then selling access to the organization to somebody who that would then perform the actual attack. And if we assume that's what was going on, it took them about a week to line up a buyer. Because after about a week, that's when we start seeing malicious hands-on keyboard activity. And it's that malicious hands-on keyboard activity that starts triggering alerts for the Sophos MDR team. From there, Sophos MDR got on it and evicted the threat actor before they could cause any major impact for the organization. So yeah, defense in depth. This is really important. It's important to assume that, yeah, sometimes security controls, security tools, they may fail. They assume that they will fail. And in this case, yeah, by having that mindset, this customer was able to successfully protect their estate. From here, what we're doing, our MDR analysts were actually able to get their hands on that sample of malware transfer loader from the victim machine. That means that we've got our hands on a very new and very sneaky piece of malware that, yeah, maybe not everybody's got their hands on. And so, yeah, that is something that we absolutely got over to into the hands of our malware researchers over at Sophos Labs so that they can analyze it, come up with the protections, and yeah, protect the rest of our customer base. So that's actually going to do it for me. I'll be handing it off to Pavli to talk about the threat hunting section.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan, and hello, everyone. All right, so the threat hunts that I'm going to be highlighting today are directly and indirectly related to the topics that both Mark and Jordan covered. This kind of highlights also the process workflow in terms of how inputs and outputs from different teams within Sophos flow as we collaborate in terms of the research teams and the topics that we cover in our own respective functions. So the first one we're going to be talking about is the sandboxing abuse. So you heard Jordan talk about a little bit about sandboxing and impersonation of Sophos agents. So I'm going to highlight a little bit about sandboxing and that specific attack vector and some of the research that we've done on our side in terms of the threat hunting. So to start off with, what is sandboxing? For those of you who are not maybe aware, sandboxing it's kind of a giveaway in the name itself. It's an isolated environment. It's a virtualized environment that kind of isolates the execution and the dependencies of a specific application or a program, a binary, so that it can operate within an isolated and vacuum sealed quote unquote environment, not interacting with any of the resources that are supplied by the host system itself beyond the processing power and the memory. But at the same time, even any sort of memory allocation is going to be handled within a sandbox environment and is not allowed to kind of traverse or transact into other processes that are running on that whole system. So what is sandboxing used for? Well, generally it's used for testing, testing code, testing new projects, binaries that you don't want necessarily running in a separate VM or the host system itself due to risks or if it's a malicious type of code, any dangers of infecting the actual host machine itself. Sometimes these are used by developers of applications to actually see how well their applications run on specific environments and specific hosts. But overall, it's done for testing. A lot of times, sandbox is also used by malware researchers to actually, quote unquote, blow up a piece of malware and see what happens with it, what kind of process it's trying to spawn, is it trying to communicate with another node on the same network, or is it trying to reach out to command control server, for example, outside in the environment? And there are certain parameters that can be set within sandboxing to either allow or disallow this kind of traffic. Now, the architecture itself of sandboxing is interesting, and it kind of pivots into the next section. So there are a couple of different components or layers, as they call them. The kernel mode components or the layer is really what allows sandboxing to interact with this host system. So these are things like enabling driver support and drivers that enable the applications to work with specific pieces of hardware, as well as the actual system level interactions, anything that is kind of under the hood that allows the process to utilize the actual resources from the host system without actually spilling out outside of the sandbox itself. There are user mode components or the user mode layers, which is basically just the tools, the user interface, everything that allows the user to interact with the application itself, as well as the core sandbox system itself that kind of governs and orchestrates how a specific process is run within sandboxing. Then there's the process layer itself, which is how sandboxing itself interacts with the process, with the binary that is being executed within sandboxing itself, any sort of process injections that occur. And then there's the resource virtualization, which is what allows sandboxing to enable and virtualize specific resources that a process may need. For example, it will virtualize its own registry system. It will virtualize its own file system itself so that whatever process is running within an environment has no idea that it's being run in a virtualized environment or a sandbox environment. It thinks that it's living on a real host. And then there's a configuration layer that kind of governs the configurations and the settings of sandbox itself and how it executes the processes. Now, some of you may be keen-eyed and see that one of these layers is bolded, and that is for a good reason. Because when we talk about the process layer itself, the process execution layer, there's a very key library that is part of that operation, which is called the SBIE DLL.dll. Now, what does this library do? It's called an injection library. Injection library basically is the core functionality of sandboxing. It injects into every running process that runs within sandboxing, and it tricks that process into only interacting with sandboxing and sandboxing virtualized resources and nothing else. This is basically the nuts and the bolts of sandboxing, the meat and potatoes, to say. This is what enables the process to actually be isolated from the host. And it's a set of functions and instructions that allow the sandboxing to specifically and exclusively talk to that process, and the process vice versa talks to Sandboxy and nothing else, no other processes, no other resources. It routes any sort of function calls to the virtualized resources, and it doesn't allow anything to spill out. The problem with this is that there is a number of processes within Sandbox itself, the architecture, that also interact with this DLL. And some of them did not have specific instructions to call upon this DLL from a specified location. So you may be familiar with a concept of a search order hijacking, where a specific DLL is, when the process is looking for a DLL, it will kind of go through a hierarchy list of where that DLL should exist. And unless the process itself, the function specifies where that DLL should live, then the Windows itself will just go through the list, the hierarchical list, until it finds the DLL that it needs. What this allows attackers to do is it allows for the actual DLL to be spoofed, or a malicious DLL to be put in place of a legitimate one in the location that the search order would look into first before it actually hits the appropriate DLL. And as a result, it could potentially inject malicious code into either the process itself or the operating system, depending on the functionality of the code itself. So in this case, what has occurred is that the DLL itself was not specifically, it was not exclusively specified the location of the system drive itself. So attackers have used malicious DLLs in case of that and put it in the same folder, same directory as Sandboxy. So whenever Sandboxy wants to invoke that specific DLL, it will invoke the malicious one first because it's at the top, the hierarchical top of the actual search order itself. What happened in this case, at least part of the research that we've conducted, is that the DLL itself allowed for C2 communication to Google Drive. And the way that this entire environment works is that Google Drive, the attackers will actually generate a malicious Google Sheet, and the DLL will have APIs to interact with that Google Sheet. And the Google Sheet will actually have both a set of columns that are used to exfiltrate data. It will populate those columns based on the API calls from Sandboxy running that malicious code. As well, it will have a set, like a preset list of instructions that in another column, and the API would read that other column and then execute the actual call commands one at a time. And obviously, this sheet can be customized at any time by the attacker, so the attackers can always either put new commands in it, remove them, interact interactively in terms of real time with the actual victim system itself, all through Sandbox environment, all through that specific API set of instructions that the malicious library has allowed them to do. In this case, another piece of behavior that the attackers have exhibited was the fact that they tried to hide the existence of Sandboxy, because Sandboxy oftentimes can be used in a benign, legitimate kind of way. But in this case, they were actually hiding it as a CryptoGuard process. I guess the idea here is that they knew that the systems themselves that they were trying to infect had Sophos protection, and they knew that the term CryptoGuard is associated with Sophos. So therefore, they were thinking, okay, how do I hide myself from forensic analysts or the system administrators? Well, I'll just call myself CryptoGuard.exe. The binary itself. If they see that, they will just think it's Sophos. The thing is, the CryptoGuard.exe doesn't exist. It's not a binary itself. CryptoGuard is a module of the Sophos agent that actually allows protection against ransomware and other types of attacks. So in this case, the CryptoGuard.exe, the fact that it was an exe, is what tipped off our investigators, and we ended up finding and tracking the attacker just based on that. And that was actually it turned into a much broader investigation once we realized what was happening. So it's interesting that the attackers have used or tried to use a specific tactic to evade detection, which ended up prompting our investigators to look even deeper because it looked anomalous. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, in this case. So nonetheless, it's an interesting way, an interesting attack vector to utilize Sandboxy for this specific purpose. And this specific vulnerability has been fixed by Sandboxy. So they actually did specify in the function calls that the DLL itself should be called specifically from the system drive and not using the search order. So in this case, the actual DLL sideloading capability has been corrected by the developers, but an interesting vector nonetheless. And in this case, the actual query that kind of started off our threat hunting was just a specific query that looked for any binaries that mimicked CryptoGuard or CryptoGuard type functionality that were previously named Sandboxy or had Sandboxy as a signer of the binary, which would indicate that they were trying to sideload and malicious DLL potentially. Specifically looking at different versions of Sandboxy, because again, the newer versions have this fixed, but nonetheless, this kind of kicks you off into the right direction, and you can pivot with different hunts based on this. The next one is going to talk a little bit about NPM and NPM packages. This is kind of pivoting off of what Mark was talking about earlier about the supply chain type of infections and attacks. So I want to highlight a little bit of a specific case that we were looking. In this case, it was targeting Cursor AI, which is a developer tool. But again, utilizing these types of malicious NPM packages, which I think pivots really nicely off of Mark's section of the talk. So talking first about what is Cursor AI. Cursor AI is an application that you have, everybody's now using AI or are claiming to. So in this case, they are as well. Cursor AI is an environment that allows developers to use AI support and AI tools to help them code. So what can this do, or what does it claim that it can do? Well, it can do a couple of things. It can do predictive text depending on the syntax that you're trying to do, also the type of project that you're trying to code. It allows and provides support for various different programming languages. So it's kind of agnostic in that sense that it will provide you support with any sort of language or most of the languages, the popular ones. It also does syntax suggestions as well. So if you're trying to do something and it sees that you're failing, or you just ask it for help, you're saying, hey, I want to do A, but I'm not sure of the syntax of how to do this. How do I complete this specific function? The tool itself, Cursor AI, will provide developers with a suggestion on the type of syntax that they can use or a function that they can use, or maybe even a call upon a library that is available that will allow that functionality. Another interesting part is the fact that you can utilize natural language to prompt AI to write code for you. So you can say, can you write me a function that does this? So without any knowledge of the syntax at all, or how it should flow, or any algorithms that are maybe necessary to complete that function, you can simply say, hey, help me make this specific function. And Cursor AI will work with you prompt by prompt, line by line, to figure out how to do it and to provide you with a code block that you can then develop on and expand upon. So in theory, it sounds really interesting. Now, this specific application is also available for Mac OS. And a group of threat actors have developed a set of NPM packages to inject malicious code. Now, before we kind of get into that, let's talk a little bit about what is NPM and why it's being used. NPM, Mark mentioned that as well earlier. It stands for Node Package Manager. It is think of it as like a package, like a code patch installer package that is kind of self-contained for a specific project that you're trying to build within, let's say, JavaScript. So what it does is that it provides a couple of things. It provides metadata about the project itself. It provides any sort of patching or core code that is associated with that specific project. And it also provides any sort of dependencies that the project itself needs in order to operate, and it will automatically fetch those dependencies depending on the platform that you're trying to install it with. So it's kind of like an installer, but not really. It's more like a really like a metadata type of package that can be published and can be used and utilized by different projects depending on your needs. So it could be cross-compatible with other projects because most of them will be written in JavaScript. So therefore, this provides that type of functionality. They're almost kind of like library packages for specific JavaScript programs and applications. So in this case, NPM itself is a global platform that is maintained by GitHub. And it's actually, you can upload freely your NPM packages and share them with the rest of the world. So it's kind of like a collaboration platform as well. So why that's interesting? Well, Cursor AI itself, the way that it interacts with AI models is that it obviously needs to charge money. So in order to do that, it will charge per package of words or package of prompts, and depending on what kind of model you opt to do, because it allows you access to different kind of models, it will charge you different rates. Developers, of course, always trying to find ways to do things cheaper. So the threat actors themselves have published a set of 3 NPM packages called SWCur, SWCur1, and AI IDE/cur or -cur. What these packages claim to be are cheap or inexpensive APIs to language models that provide the same AI functionality that the core application does itself. So the developers have stated, the threat actors themselves are stating, hey, I know that you want to use this application, and we know that it's quote unquote expensive. So if you use our set of APIs, it will actually enable you for much cheaper access to AI language models, and you will still have very similar functionality for a fraction of the cost. And obviously that sounds very appealing to developers depending on their circumstances. So they downloaded these packages. And what do these packages do? Well, there's like a step-by-step. I mentioned kind of what is usually contained within those NPM packages, dependencies and core code snippets. So in this case, these code snippets will do the following things. First, they will actually harvest the credentials because the NPM package upon installation will ask the users to supply their credentials in order to install. Once they do that, they have a set of instructions to download secondary payloads from the C2 servers that are hard-coded within the packages themselves. Then they will inject the malicious code snippets into Cursor AI to ensure that the actual code itself runs every time that the cursor runs. And also they will disable auto update so the cursor can never update or purge that code as per any sort of algorithm to use like a diff between the codes. And it will restart the application, making sure that whatever code was injected is now saved within the application itself. And this enables persistence functionality for the user itself for as long as they continue using this specific application. So it's in one kind of stroke, you're getting the entire both theft of credentials as well as C2 communication, secondary malware, and persistence mechanism all in one, just by enticing the users to find a cheaper way to interact with an AI model. So really interesting attack vector. Again, this has been removed since then, but it stayed up for a few weeks. So they had, hundreds of thousands of downloads, unfortunately, like Mark was mentioning with the 1.6 million downloads. I mean, these are pretty big numbers. And in this case, it's an enticing one. So a lot of developers downloaded this. So there was a big publication by Cursor AI to make sure that people are aware that this has been happening and to kind of close off or to patch their applications as soon as possible. So an interesting vector nonetheless, utilizing that NPM kind of method of delivery. So in this case, we're looking for specifically those malicious packages because it's associated, the hunt itself is associated with Cursor AI as the application. And we're also utilizing some interesting regex to ensure that we're actually seeing the operators from that specific installation of NPMs that kind of match the expected behavior that the attackers are expecting from their packages. So interesting vector nonetheless. Thank you very much. And I'll pivot over now to Greg.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pablo. That was awesome. And a little bit of fun when you're talking about Sandboxy. So when we acquired a company called Invincia a while ago for some of their sort of machine learning techniques, this is many years back, Sandboxy was an application that they'd actually purchased. So it was quite fun because, of course, we closed down the application. It wasn't a big part of the business, but I was part of a small group that fought for it to be open source. And it's a shame to see it being abused. Give back to the community and that you see them see actors take advantage of anything they can. But hey, it's always good fun. What I'll do actually, sorry, just remembered I actually have 2 sections this month. So let's jump onto the XOps review. So there's only sort of 2 articles that I think worth bringing up this month that I thought were quite exciting. The first one is it's fun. I think you should just go read this just more for the fun of it. It's the strange tale of Ish 83 when cyber criminals eat their own. I'm going to sort of give you the minor spoiler. It's in the first paragraph, but one of our threat researchers was looking into a remote access Trojan that had been posted on GitHub, and a customer had asked us, hey, is Sophos protecting against this remote access Trojan? It's a great question. We always field these questions. We take them daily. This is part of our kind of process. Customers send requests to Sophos Labs, or either by proxy of MDR or directly through the website. And what was interesting is that, so one of our researchers took a look at it and found that firstly, it wasn't really going to sort of do anything. There was no real problems. It wasn't going to get past our defenses. But what was interesting is that the remote access Trojan, when compiled, has a remote access Trojan built into it to rat the rat users. So great read up. Really interesting to see cyber criminals trying to trick other cyber criminals into becoming victims of their I guess peers. Cool read. The other one was the June Patch Tuesday. Another bunch of vulnerabilities. And of course, one of those being the WebDAV vulnerability that was on Microsoft Windows that Mark talked at the start. both really cool. You should definitely read into them, especially Patch Tuesday. I think it's always good to not just go, I need to patch them, but to understand like the classes of vulnerabilities, where they're kind of emerging, what kind of risky technologies. I always find these articles, they're written by Angela, they're excellent, the Patch Tuesday articles, but they actually give you a taste for like what's causing to be problems. And so, for instance, like WebDAV is an old sort of technology. Often you sort of set it up on a Microsoft IIS server, but actually WebDAV as a technology exists in like browsers for doing, I think they're called internet shared links or shared folders or something. And it's these lesser known technologies that we don't encounter. And it's interesting when vulnerabilities pop up in them, and it's always fun to learn about them. So yeah, worth checking it out. All right, let's jump on to the most unwanted. So this is a shareable image. It goes up onto the community channel roughly within the next 24 hours when this post goes out with the video and everything and all the references. And this is designed for you to just share with your end users to make them aware of topics. And there was kind of a theme this month, especially around like Node Package Manager. I decided to try and abstract it a little bit more. It's a bit too wordy, but I think it's still a good thing to share with end users nonetheless. So this time I'm talking around just sort of software plugins, add-ons, extensions, and packages, even when it comes to like software development. Effectively just highlighting the risk, that they're great. Everyone loves an extension, adds new features, but it comes with security risks. When you install them, if it's not made by the developer who's made the application you're using, this is a third party you're giving permission to run code on your machine, and threat actors are often looking to take over these things, to take over old packages or typo squat them. And this is the same with software packages. And so this is sort of a list of recommendations in general. Keep them to, the most important ones I think that are quite good on here is like limiting the use, watching for behavior changes on your systems, researching who makes them, and avoid using really old sort of packages that haven't been used in a while and so on, as they could also have vulnerabilities. But yeah, that'll go up on the community in the next 24 hours or so. Right, we're at the Q&A section. Not a ton of time for the Q&A, so what I'll do is I'll try and keep it succinct. While I let any last sort of questions come in there, just a reminder to everyone, we publish the Sophos MDR threat brief, which is our weekly community channel post. It's a text post. It covers a lot of the things that we can't bring into the ThreatCast because there's more important things that crop up. So we kind of stick a few bits and pieces in here. This covers like weekly sort of vulnerability changes, things that are being exploited in the wild, sort of notable news, and sort of the activity on ransomware leak sites. So definitely worth a read. Of course, as a further reading, this will go on the community channel. So if you're looking for any of these references, don't panic. You don't need to make a screenshot right now, but you're welcome to. But yeah, this will all go in the community channel in the next 24 hours or so. Right, let's dive into some questions. I'm going to try and tackle a couple of these at the same time. So someone was saying, how would you keep an eye on Node Package Manager packages, so NPM, Node.js packages? How do you be confident that they're not vulnerable? And at the same time, someone also asked a similar question, which is, they don't use Node, but they use a lot of Python. How can they be sure that some Python packages and their dependencies are safe to use and aren't backdoored? So talking about Node, there's a couple of things. There's NPM audit, which I think if you're using Node.js, you should know about this thing. NPM audit is a simple package. You've got to trust the package. So, who watches the watchman? But what it does is it looks for vulnerabilities in NPM packages and their dependencies. So it lets you know if there's any outstanding unpatched vulnerabilities in any parts of the kind of the chain of packages that you're using in Node, and helps you make informed decisions whether to choose to use a package, or if you're using something, if it has got a vulnerability, to then check with the developer, see how that's progressing. Is a patch coming? Has it been sort of end of life? And is there another package you need to switch to? Another thing, and I'm going to mention a couple of vendors here, but this is just this isn't sort of my recommendations. It's just to let you know the caliber of things to look out for. But the first thing is, if you're using a sort of a software hosting solution like GitHub, GitHub have their advisories, so they're known as GHSA, but github.com/advisories, they actually publish really good detailed sort of advisories on any kind of vulnerability in any kind of open source package. You can also actually use that repo. It's in a repo, so you can actually clone it, use tools to analyze it. It's very funky, but also they just cover loads of things that are going on. And also, if you're using Dependabot in GitHub, it leverages the GHSAs, so the GitHub security advisories, to flag up stuff if you're using it. So Dependabot's a great feature if you're in GitHub. If you're not, I'm sure there's parallel or similar features in whatever kind of hosting solution you're using for your code. And when it comes to Python, I know there's something called Safety CLI that I've used before. Safety CLI is another one of those tools that just audits the packages you're using. To mention a vendor, so that if you're going to look for similar vendors, you can go and use all those sort of alternative to websites that help you find alternatives to these kind of software solutions if you want to check the marketplace. But another vendor called Black Duck does application security, which is the same thing. It sort of analyzes all the software you're using, that you're developing, the dependencies, and looking for vulnerabilities and flagging that up to you so you can prioritize getting your software patched as well. And there's loads of other thing out there. So you might want to look for, I think the terms typically, so just type in like software development lifecycle, sometimes known as SDLC, and then SDLC security, software development lifecycle security. That'll help you find these kind of things. There was another quick one, actually, which was, is there a way to block Sandboxy entirely, other than hunting for it? I believe Sandboxy is in our application control policy, so you should be able to use that. I'm not sure if it's relevant to the one that's just been. Double check, but I know Sandboxy is listed in there, so hopefully that'll spot the DLL. I don't know how much development's been done on the open source version, and if someone's compiled it differently, how much change has happened. But there is an entry for Sandboxy in there. The last one, I'm going to pull Mark Parsons if you're behind the scenes. You can take us home with the final question. So I think this is relative to one of your slides, which is showing the attack vectors. You're still muted, by the way. It was why are VPNs such a common attack vector? Good question, really.
That's a great question. So a few different reasons jump to mind. So VPNs are inherently, or more than likely, right, and 99.9% of the time, going to always be on. Right? These are meant to function as, and when you're creating actually exploits, right? As a threat actor, you only have so much time, you only have so much resources that you can spend in actually crafting your exploit. And so if you can ensure that the system that is always going to be on, and then secondly, VPNs are always going to be available to the open network, or primarily, right, they are, as they function as gateways to the network, they know that that exploit can allow them access into a targeted environment. So that means that that expensive exploit is always going to be functional and usable. Secondly, VPNs can also function as kind of gateway controls to both the network. And so at large, right? So it allows the threat actor to gain immediate access into the enterprise that they're attacking, but it can also be leveraged as kind of a gateway to, say, sensitive networks, right? So it allows them into those more private enclaves of the actual enterprise, right? So again, that's kind of a key that the threat actors really want to craft to get behind that locked door. And then finally, depending on that VPN's configuration, that can actually allow for the threat actor to just authenticate their own machine into the network, right? So if they're, breaking in, this essentially allows them to bring their own machine in, bring their own tools and kit with them to essentially just take any tool and launch it against the entire environment, because they're not going to and bypass endpoint protections, because they're not going to have an EDR installed on their attacking laptop that's deployed by that enterprise for monitoring.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I know I've seen other bits of research you've done, Mark, as well, around just the fact that some people also expose the wrong users to the internet. Like they put, their printers, and accidentally give the printer with the default password of like printer 2021 as something that's easily brute forced because they've set that up accidentally. So easily misconfigured as well, I imagine, especially with the complexities of Active Directory. I mean, there's a reason I ran away from IT. I can't handle AD. too many reams of inheriting group memberships and so on for my taste. I'm a coder at heart, I think. But yeah, that was amazing. Thanks, Mark. All right, we've hit time. So as always, just a quick final reminder to make sure you go check out the threat brief. You can also click the turn blog notifications button on. That will give you notifications. The references and everything that we've mentioned today will be made available on the MDR community channel, including the video recording, the most unwanted image, and as a previous recommendation by a member of this talk, the actual text from the image so that you can reuse it however you like. It's there for you. You can change it. You can translate it. So I'll make sure that's posted hopefully in the next 24 hours or so. But with that, just want to say, as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking a concerned interest in what's going on in the cybersecurity space. As I always say, us banding together, communicating, learning from each other, from vendor to vendor, customer to vendor, vendor to customer, yada, yada, yada. But by joining together and being all on the side of blue, it helps us stay hopefully one step ahead, or at least helps us collaborate to stay on top of what threat actors are getting up to. All right, until next time, stay watchful, stay vigilant, and if there's anything that you have, you observe, anything that's causing you any concerns, do not hesitate to contact the MDR operations team at your earliest convenience. All right, thanks so much. You take care.